Okay, I think it's working. I'm back in plenary session, video edition, but we will eventually put these on audio with David Russler Germain. Dr. Germain is back. He's an MSTP from Washington University, St. Louis. He is a HemeOnc fellow. He is a card-carrying plenard, and he previously appeared to talk about a CAR-T product, which has since been licensed. Dr. Russler Germain is back, and we're going to spar it out about medical science training programs. David, it's a pleasure to see you again.
Good to be here, Vinay. I think this will be a fun topic to talk about, and I think we might have each come with surprising viewpoints on the issue.
Oh, okay, that's what I look forward to, and I'm sure that everyone will agree with everything we say.
If not, they should delete my Twitter account, right?
No, well, if they don't agree with everything in this video, David, it's very simple what they need to do. You find two other people who don't agree, and boom, you fact check us off this planet. You make us misleading and false. They're wrong, because that's the gold standard form of adjudicating disputes.
Yeah, I mean, as long as if one person who's in charge and has a lot of followers says, "Can't say that, I don't like that," then you can't say that. I mean, it's very, very clear. You're free to speech. For your free speech is what you free to speak what I want to hear.
Yeah, you're free to speak what I want to hear. Yeah, I guess we'll talk about it for just 1 second because we were talking before, and I don't know. I mean, I think many of us recognize there's a lot of garbage on Facebook. Sure enough, I thought garbage was their business model, but I don't know what their business model. But there's a lot of garbage on it, and they're under political pressure to crack down. And I don't envy that job because I don't know how you do it. You want to do it in a way that's transparent, that's systematic, that's fair, that has an appeals process. You have to do it in some sort of manner like that if you're going to do it. And it appears they're under pressure to do it, lest they be broken up, which is actually kind of what I favor. But if you're going to do it, I'm pretty confident that that the way not to do it is to contract it to a third-party website that trolls around on Twitter looking to see who's not going to like something. And I don't know how they're picking the articles to go after in the first place. Yeah,
it makes no sense. It makes no sense. I mean, I have screenshot databases of hilarious anti-vax, anti-GMO things that friends and family have said in the past, and we have lengthy, fun debates with links and references within the thread. But I don't think my third aunt twice removed needs to have her feed cleansed by Facebook doing some that zinc prevents AIDS or something. It's not worth it's almost not worth the effort. And if you are going to put the effort forward, highly likely you do it in a wrong way.
Yeah, that's my concern here. But I think it's a tough thing, which is that one can be a publisher, one can be a town square. And if you're a publisher, then you take responsibility for your content, like the New York Times, like the Wall Street Journal. You own what you print, the New England Journal. And you don't have to print anything you don't want to print. You're a publisher. But you're sued for defamation. You're sued for libel and slander. You own that as well. But if you want to be a bulletin board, if you want to be a place, a town square, and you start also restricting content, I think it's a very tough situation to be in. I don't know if I have the answer, how they're going to solve it, but I do think that this is a ridiculous first step.
Yeah. I mean, I try to play devil's advocate to my own point of view and say, well, I did like the fact that Parler got kind of ratioed.
I think
but that was almost by the support system. It wasn't like the government said, Parler, you can't have somebody saying something mean about Pelosi. It's that, it's a business and they rely on other businesses to deliver their product, and nobody wants to be involved in that trash.
Right.
Maybe just advertisers won't advertise on your page on Facebook because they don't like that you want to liberalize behaviors after a COVID vaccine. I mean, so thus you'll make even less than $0 on your chances thus far.
Right. You make a good point. I mean, Parler. First, I think Parler was destined to succumb. It didn't have legs under that Parler. It wasn't going far. But the sorts of things said on Parler were really crazy. Yeah. Whether or not you should hug your grandma after a vaccine, or whether or not cases will be low by the end of April, I don't think it's on the same. It's probably too clean for Parler. It's too appropriate for Parler.
You would have been ratioed the other direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Inappropriate memes after your link.
Before we were talking, you made a really good analogy. Let's tie this to the MSTP. Let's talk about the MSTP. The analogy you made was that, just because one's critical of something, like I've been critical of the censoring on Facebook, and maybe we'll both be to some degree critical of the MSTP program, doesn't mean we don't agree in the goal. In the former, the goal is, having better quality and caliber of discourse. And I think in the MSTP case, the case is training really thoughtful physician scientists as cheaply and efficiently as possible. We agree on that.
I totally agree. I think, an apt analogy is your efforts to improve cancer drug development. I mean, you are not complaining about things, and I think you're complaining rightly, such that with the end goal in mind of not letting cancer patients receive active treatments, you're actually, it's the opposite. You want patients to receive the most efficacious, most cost-effective therapies, and maybe we're deviating from that goal. And I think that's very parallel to how we discuss educational structures in medical school, medical training, and scientific training, because being critical of one way that we do something, even subtly critical, can easily be taken as an attempt to undermine the process. And also it can be taken as a very personal criticism of the person who made that choice, and saying, because it can be interpreted as, you shouldn't have done this with your life, and you shouldn't have made this 8-year sacrifice to do MD PhD, when that's not really the point. It's on a societal level, what do we think is best?
I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I guess I've stepped in it many times in the past. On Twitter a couple of years ago, maybe 5 years ago, and then again 3 years ago. You always step in the same potholes, and I think it's because I didn't do a good job, and to some degree, the media doesn't allow you to do a good job of distinguishing the fact that I got nothing against physician scientists. I want physician scientists. If I didn't have physician scientists, how the hell am I going to get new cures? Honestly, somebody got to do that work. So I want physician scientists. At the same time, I also want a few other things. I want 20-year-old young people who are really smart in college to have their options open, to not feel like just because you're super smart, you ought to do the most training possible. If someday you may not end up doing half of what you trained for anyway, and that if governments are going to shell out $500,000 per MSTP slot, they have to have some idea what the return on investment is and what the opportunity cost is, how they might have given that 500 mil elsewhere.
Yeah. So, I did a little bit of double checking my own historical knowledge base of the MD PhD training schema at large, just in case your listeners only know things as far as what we're doing right now. And I'll give the disclaimer that both my father and wife are MD PhD. So I have generational and cross-gender comparisons to make, both from the anecdotal standpoint, but then
you're
also
an MSTP. Your father's MSTP. Your wife's MSTP.
Yeah, exactly.
I see.
I can't avoid them. And two grooms.
three peer reviewers for Facebook fact checking, all ready to go. Done.
Yeah. I'm the only one with an active Twitter account. Anyway,
okay. too few followers. Yeah, you won't cut.
So MD PhD really became a thing in the 50s. And from my reading, it was the Western part of Case Western first offered that. And then in the 60s, 1964 launched the first MSTP granting schema through the NIGMS, such that NIH would give training grants to medical schools to fund this program. And so Yeshiva, NYU, and Northwestern were the first three. And then over the next 5 or 10 years, many other programs emerged, WashU, Penn, Harvard, et cetera, being some of the other first ones. And some of them have sort of come and gone in terms of their funding since then. But by and large, right now, we have about 80 to 90 MD PhD programs, of which around 2/3 are formal MSTP programs. And so what that means is that the institution is getting a federal grant from NIGMS, to a training grant, to provide stipend assistance, tuition funding, and other financial support for the students in that program. Right now, we have about 1,000 slots per year for MSTP students. That's relatively stable over the past 10 to 15 years. Application rates are going up. And on average, only about a quarter of the years of MSTP training are paid for through the NIGMS training grants. I think that's actually a factor that's commonly overlooked, that the NIGMS grants don't pay for even a single student's full path.
Really?
You need matching funds, other training grants, other research grants, and tuition discounts to sort of compensate that cost as well.
I see. So to bridge the gap, the university is going to say, we'll give you a deal on the MD portion, and somebody else has got to kick up some cash. So we've got stipend support. Okay. And maybe tell people, like, when you're an MSTP, what do you get?
So, take a pre-med, their one option is to pursue medical school. Now there are myriad sort of fast tracky or combination type things you can do, but the default is to go to a 4-year medical degree. The first 2 years, 18 months to 24 months, largely being classroom experiences, basic science knowledge, and we can rail on step 1 ad nauseum. And then the latter 2 years, years 3 and 4 of medical school, are your clinical clerkships, potentially like a small research rotation, et cetera, vacation, interviews, et cetera. So, think of it as a 4-year degree by and large. Traditional PhDs in America right now, because they're shorter often in Europe and EU and UK, most PhDs range between 5 to 7 years in the biomedical sciences. And most students, by and large, don't have to provide their own funding for it. They're not paying out of pocket for that degree, and they're getting a stipend, using round numbers, roughly around $30K a year as like living expenses during that PhD.
Those fat cats.
Yeah, those fat cats. And that's taxable, thanks to Reagan, actually.
Oh, it's taxable?
Yeah, yeah, they changed it. Reagan increased the taxes on people making $30K in the 80s. Anyway,
it'll all trickle down to me.
Yeah, exactly. So then the first year or two of most PhD training programs involves a good bit of coursework. So as does the first years of medical school. And so when you do an MD PhD program, you take a few fewer MD courses, like you might not take the same biochem class, but instead you'll take the PhD level biochem class, genetics or something swapped out as well, depending on what degree you're getting, such that usually between your second and third year of med school, you take a 3 to 5 year, sometimes 6-year gap to do a PhD in usually the basic sciences. You, by and large, there's a rare economics, anthropology, philosophy PhD that gets accomplished, and I know some people that have done those, and that I love those folks. But the safe assumption is that the people are getting immunology, genetics, biochemistry, et cetera, PhD degrees there. And so then you defend your thesis, and you have some struggle getting your timing right from defending your PhD thesis to go back into the clinical clerkships. So you haven't thought about medicine or seen a patient in 4+ years. And then you finish your med school, and then you apply to residency with all of your classmates. And that has its own can of worms.
Yeah. So that first year back into the MD life, that's a rough year, because you go from being high on the totem pole of lab workers, and a very consummate expert in your little subdiscipline, to being in the lowest rung in the hospital. And the expression is correct. Things go downhill, and being a trainee. And I feel like that takes some getting used to. What do you? You've lived it.
Yeah, we do not have a very aggressive, pardon the language, pimping culture at WashU, where I went to MD PhD. But I distinctly remember being asked by my pediatric senior resident in front of a patient's family 1 week after coming back from lab, what is the third most likely bacteria to cause neonatal meningitis?
Boom, number 3.
Yeah. I mean, I think I missed the fact that Listeria was in the top 3, for instance.
The third most likely.
Yeah. So things that my PhD on AML, genetics, and DNA methylation did not help me remember.
Yeah. You want to ask it in front of the patient so they know whether or not you're qualified to come back in the room later. Yeah. No, that sends a message. That sends the right message. I see.
No, and we do not have an aggressive culture of that here. So that's even mild compared to what happens.
Yeah. I went to a place that had an aggressive culture of asking you questions and telling you what the answers were. And I note that it's not always done kindly. And I do think some people genuinely believe that one lesson like that, and you're going to hit the book super hard. I mean, I think some people do believe that it motivates others. Yeah.
Yeah. No, they warn us that, you have a high likelihood of failing your first shelf exam of the clerkship you go back to, such that if you want to go into surgery or medicine or neurology,
don't do it first.
Do that rotation first. Do not go back to that one first. And that's fair. I mean, I think you're just so out of practice of studying for a standardized test. You're clumsy in the hospital. Your bedside manner is garbage. It's hard.
So that's why you did peds, huh? You didn't want to do peds.
The one thing that we didn't discuss is what does the money of this look like?
Yes,
right.
Let's talk about that.
You know,
my favorite topic.
The average med school tuition, I mean, I haven't even looked in the last few years because it's well over 50 grand a year in a private medical school. And it's still a 5-figure number at public medical schools annually. The perk of going to MD, PhD outside of all of the professional and intellectual perks is that you don't pay a dime for it. So I went to WashU MD, PhD, private medical school. I took 8 years to get my 2 degrees. Roughly, using again round numbers, I did not pay $1 towards the 50K a year tuition for those 4 years of medical training. Plus, for the medical years and the graduate school years, I received a roughly $30,000 a year stipend. So it's debt free, 8-year training debt free. That thought process of the trade-off of should I do the PhD to save the money and advance my career in some way, shape, or form is a very strange thing to put on the shoulders of a 21-year-old senior pre-med in college. I think it's I mean, I was in this position at Stanford as an undergrad, and I think I had a lot of peers do MD, PhD, but it's a weird thing to make somebody think about at that stage. I mean, mature or immature, it doesn't matter. There's a lot of cost benefit analysis that like we're not prepared to do at that stage.
Let's say, I want to say 2 things. One, you know, if one were thinking strictly from a numerical point of view about your cumulative lifetime earnings, although you benefit during those years and don't pay anything, the opportunity cost of 4 years is probably the last 4 years of your career earnings. Yeah. So it's probably some net loss there. The other point you make, I think, is the emotional point, which is, you know, you're asking a young person to commit to something that's very long and arduous, probably, you know, the longest commitment you've made up until that point. And it's even longer than you described because there's residency, fellowship, postdocing if you really want to clinch the laboratory position. So you're talking about tying yourself down from 22 to nearly 40. Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's sort of like a funny financial psychology about it. There is the opportunity cost of, you know, working certain types of jobs and certain types of hours during like your 20s and early 30s. And then, I mean, what we haven't even touched on yet, and is I think the discussion of, you know, all those things aside, what do the outcomes of that program look like? And then we can circle back to critiquing all of it. So right now, time to degree on average is 8.5 years. It was 6.5 years in the 70s. So, I mean, PhDs are getting longer. Med school is not getting that much longer. That's the point. Roughly, there's about a 10% total attrition rate. So 10% of people that start an MD PhD program around the country don't finish the 2-degree program.
Sure.
There's a small population of people that sort of get the first 2 years of med school free. I mean, this is like maybe low double digits around the country cumulatively. Get the free 2 years of med school, dabble in lab for a year, get a master's, and then finish med school and only pay half price.
Boom. A deal.
Yeah, they're called the 2 and screw crew. Yeah, and I mean, I think there are cases where that's very appropriate. Like it didn't work for them. Their PI left 1 year into lab, and they really just wanted to get back and, you know, do the medical part. But there are also people who aren't totally sold on it, and they dabble in it and reap a benefit, and then go back to the alternative.
I see. 2 and screw, huh?
Yeah. So Skip Brass, who is one of the big MSTP program directors, executive chairs of the Penn program, publishes relatively frequently sort of a historical outcomes analysis of MSTP students. And their most recent one from 2017 or 2018, I believe, reported results that around 80% of MSTP grads have academic jobs.
Yes.
Academic.
For university.
Not just that, yeah.
Yes.
And then 60% of that 80% have more than 50% of their job as research, and not the same Venn diagram, but differently. 60% of that 80% that are academic are a PI on a funded grant.
Yes.
And all of that, however, is somewhat time biased, right? Now, yes, people earlier in their career are less likely to have gotten their grants. But what I found really interesting was in the 2015 publication of this, I checked this number recently, of the cohort that graduated MSTP from 1990 to 1999, I want you to guess what percent were PIs on R01 level grants or bigger grants. So 15 years, cohort of people that graduated from 90 to 99 and are now 15 years at minimum out of their degree, if up to 25. What percent have an R01 grant or equivalent?
10%.
Exactly.
Is it? Is it?
Yeah.
You know,
so,
okay.
So they're probably still considered junior, like a large fraction may still be assistant professor level. That's fair. Fewer full professors in that cohort by the 2015 mark. But that's
low.
That's low. I mean, that is low. Like the pay line for said grants, not accounting for attrition and any presumed filtering that you're accomplishing by selecting any cream of the crop.
Right. So let me unpack those a little bit. I mean, I think David's right that there are potential biases in this data set because it's an uncontrolled data set. And one is, what is the counterfactual? What would have happened to these kids were they not to do this? And these kids are not average kids. They're superstar kids because they're so motivated, they're willing to jump into this program, which means they have shown some dedication and they have a CV commensurate with that. And so I think that to compare them to medical students at writ large is, always an inappropriate comparison. Yeah. They should be doing higher. The next point you're making is the pay line, which means that among all people who apply for some of these grants, I thought like NCI pay line is 7% or something. I mean, it's not great.
Not above 10, but still that's for a given grant, not have you gotten one.
Yes. Ever. Exactly. It's not for cumulative getting, and also doesn't account for ECI status, where I think it's maybe slightly double digits.
It's like 5% higher.
But 5% higher. So that's a good point. And you found the statistic that I had been looking for. I got lucky, but I didn't know the answer because the way they frame it so often is what percent of MD PhDs work at the university. And that's great. I mean, it's great to work at the university, but that doesn't mean you're doing physician scientist work. And you can be a clinician who runs trials, just like an MD who runs trials, but you happen to have an MD PhD. And that to me isn't like, it's a wonderful thing to do. And I'm not a laboratory person, so I'm not a physician scientist by this metric, but it's not really what the program sought to build.
It's not what they intended. Yeah. I think the goal, all of this has to say like, well, what is the goal of this program?
Yes.
And I think it's not to say that there's a existing better way to achieve that goal, but the goal in essence is to train that classic 80-20 physician scientist that all of us wrote about in our applications that we wanted. I can tell you what I want to do. I want to be a BMT lymphoma specialist who has a day of clinic a week and runs an R01 funded lab for the rest of the week. And I'll do my 6 weeks of inpatient service alongside that, I'd love to do it. I wonder if I had to pick science or medicine, which one I would do if I only could do one.
What would you pick? What's the answer to that question?
If I had to pick today, I'd slightly slant clinical. I actually was PhD versus MD PhD when I was in undergrad.
Yeah.
And every year of med school, I've liked clinical medicine more.
So if I had to pick, gun to my head, clinical. I would put away the research. Yeah. But you could argue that it's not that much of a loss to society anyway. So
and part of it is, is that a private practice oncology job or is that an academic trialist job? So that's
for you or for me? For me, it's easy. I would be in private practice if I had a choice between those two. For you, which one is it?
Academic. I do 3 days of clinic a week in trials.
3 days of clinic, then you got to pay me, man. You pay me that private practice money. Come on.
Anyway, so the question, you hinted at a question that I did not know the answer to until this morning because I thought you might ask this. Is there a slant towards being academic regardless of what residency people went to for MSTP? What do you think the percentage of MSTPs are who did derm? What's the percentage of them that are academic?
That's a good question. I guess if you like, my honest gut feeling would be that MSTPs are more likely to be academic,
Yeah.
irrespective of specialty. Yeah.
Yeah. So derm, MSTPs who pursue derm are 48% academic. I don't
Really?
know. I don't know if that's higher or lower than you think. That was higher than I
That's
thought.
way higher than I thought. Yeah.
Opto, 53%.
53. Oh, wow. Okay.
Surgery bulk is 67%.
That's so high.
So what that tells us, though, relative to the granting
Yeah.
data, is
Yes.
that we've trained a large proportion of people to be academically inclined, 50-50 clinical research, largely, because that's where that peak is on the research side. Um, I mean, they are physician scientists by, like, there's not another word for them per se.
Yes.
They're publishing, that like there's
Yes.
good data on that. But it is different as to whether the PhD training you got is
Informing
even
that publishing.
directly or indirectly applicable to what
Yeah.
you're publishing on down the line.
Yeah.
Um,
And then
and
the
I
other
think
thing
that's
is
the big question.
they're more comfortable doing X amount of clinical labor for less dollar per X, I would
Yeah.
put it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is because if they switch to private practice, they'd make more money, I think, significantly so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, the counter to this, saying like, oh, those numbers don't sound that bad, is that 24% of all MSTPs end up private practice.
Pure private. Yeah.
That feels too high to me. I don't know what
Feels
number
high.
it should be. It just feels too high. Now in that 24 minus those like 50 to 70% other wedge, there's people that work at the FDA, people that go to biotech, people that do consulting. So there's a spectrum of alternative career paths. But 20, I mean, I don't know. I think we should honestly like survey every MSTP when they come in and say like, what percentage of MSTPs should or shouldn't be private practice? Survey faculty, ask them the same question.
Right.
Because I don't know what that answer should be, but when you just add it all together, different numbers feel better or worse, and that one just doesn't feel great.
It doesn't feel, I mean, I guess the reason I would articulate, I mean, I agree with you, it doesn't feel right. And the reason is that obviously everyone in life should always do in the next year what you need to do for yourself. I mean,
this is not about one person.
It's not about one person. You should always do what you need to do. Some of us, we need to get out of this game. It's a thankless game. The grants don't come in. You just get a lot of crap on your doorstep. And you work hard, you don't get paid. I mean, that's the bottom line. You don't get paid. You don't get paid to work hard. And if you need to switch, you need to switch. However, the intent of the program is to invest at a societal level in people so that they are doing translational work, scientific work to develop cures. That's the goal. That's the purpose of the program. And so I think the fact that R1 levels are low, the fact that private practice is higher than I would think, and
a little bit,
yeah, a little bit
if
higher.
it were 15%, would I be happy? Probably.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be some attrition, but I guess I'm more interested in I'm more interested in the question of, I guess I don't want to give credit to the program if you are a lymphoma doctor who just runs Janssen trials, because you don't need the PhD to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the other thing I'd say is that I know people who have both degrees. They say like, I learned things in that degree that inform my practice, and I don't doubt. I'm sure.
That's the one. Yeah.
Okay, you want to talk about that? You talk about
so
that
that's
first.
the point. I think my MSTP cohort coming through, my wife's MSTP cohort coming through, my friends from undergrad who went elsewhere around the country. I have close friends who are saying, well, I want to go do neurosurgery after MSTP. And that's just their passion, women. And that's amazing and good for them. Like you're saying, this isn't about one person. They should all go do what they want to do.
Right.
But how many people, when they finish MSTP, should be saying, I don't want to have a lab? Like, that's another question, right?
Yes,
like
that's the question.
That's the question. Yeah. Now, what percentage of MSTPs, the day they match into residency, should still be saying, I 100% hope to have a lab?
I'd say 80% is my
gut. That number should be 80 to 90%.
Yeah, that's what I think. Okay, we're on the same.
I mean, if you, for the underserved, medical specialties, if somebody really wants to do like rural primary care because that's what they got into, then I'd honestly say that's better for society than some alternative forcing you to be a PI. Like, if those are your interests. But as far as, or otherwise though, I mean, the question is like, it was good for you in hindsight if you liked the program and you got it out of it, but that's what sort of, coming back to the censorship point, it's worth discussing. Are we doing it right to produce the most, to most efficiently produce people that when they match for residency still want to have labs.
Right.
That's what we're asking here.
Right.
And I've tried to think about the alternatives. One alternative is, and I think you've proposed this in prior plenary session podcasts, is what if we shift resources to people in fellowship, such that fellowship, instead of being 3 years for HemeOnc, is actually 6, because you get like paid on a somewhat generous postdoc scale. Right. You have research support. You can take a few biostats classes and some basic science classes if you want. And I'm going to show my true colors that I think it's a hard ask. I think you may select for like the true tip of the iceberg people that can go straight MD into medicine residency, into HemeOnc fellowship, just as an example, and then pivot and learn pipetting, mouse work, flow cytometry, et cetera. Like some people will pick that up super easily depending on their situation. I think that it will be efficient, but the N out the other end will be smaller.
I see. Okay.
For a few reasons.
Yes.
And then, I mean, the other alternative, which is I think something my friends and I have been floating with, is what if people did their PhD between their 3rd and 4th year of med school?
Okay.
Rather than doing it earlier, do it later, once you've already pretty much decided what you're going to go into. Because part of it now is, you know, if you do basic immunology research and then you find out you love neurosurgery,
right?
You know, then you're trying to grapple with, well, can I connect those dots? Well, not really. I'll just go to neurosurgery.
Right.
Now, that said, we have some actually quite prominent like neurosurgeons at WashU that do immunology research, and so great, that's good for them. Like that's not, again, it's not an individual critique, but you know, say you've gone through 3rd year of med school and now you know you want to do peds HemeOnc, or now you know you want to do rheumatology, or now you know you want to do peds neuro. Then you do a PhD in a related area. I think those people, now only being a few months away from applying to residency, are far more likely to be willing to say, I'm 100% certain I want a lab.
Yes. The only downside of that second thing is when you go back for 4th year, you have to do a real 4th year.
Yeah, you have to do a real 4th year.
A real 4th year, right? Not this 4th year vacation 4th year, right? Okay.
No, you have to like start with like a 3-month sub-I in what you want.
Okay. Well, I like that. Okay. I like your proposal for a few reasons, because also your lab work will be informed by your clinical experience that 1 year. I know it seems ridiculous to say, but it's true that 1 year really, I think the 2 most transformative years in the life of a clinician are 3rd year medical school and intern year. And to some degree, 1st year fellowship for us, because what we do is really different than general internal medicine.
No, I mean, I distinctly remember going to a journal club in grad school. Amongst everyone there was either straight PhD or an MD PhD pre 3rd year of med school. So it was all trainees. And again, this is not a personal critique of anybody, but we were discussing, I believe, a paper, I think it was like Jay Bradner, MIC, BRD4, like a mouse model of cancer, inhibiting a cofactor that is involved in
bromodomain, the bromodomain.
And literally, there was something. The crux of the figure was a Kaplan-Meier curve of mice, like N of 5 in each sample. The control group died, like the curve just plummeted at 20 days, and then you gave them some drug, and like 7 days later, all the mice went kaput. And that was like the ta-da, P is less than 0.05. This drug is a therapeutic option. So, I mean, and literally, like, we were all like, yay, hooray, you cured cancer in a mouse. And I remember, because I felt I was at least a relatively clinically informed PhD student at the time. My mentor is a straight MD, et cetera. I did a lot of shadowing. I was like, guys, every mouse died of cancer a week later. Like, this isn't even like a good PFS curve. I mean, this is like, you just slow down metabolism in the mouse and they all went a few weeks later. So just that insight of like, what is a therapeutic target? What is a meaningful benefit in a patient? Stuff you've written at length about is stuff you learn in 3rd year.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean,
in terms of thinking about how you interpret your results in lab. Honestly.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's well put. And also and then as you start to factor in the fact that there's already a translation gap from mice to man, when the results are even bigger, Now
Yeah.
you're talking about 1 week later. Yeah, I would say that my enthusiasm is quite low. But yeah, it's an excellent point. And even, I mean, the point I think that you're making that I really like is that, people always ask me, like, how do I know what to specialize in? I was like, you do not know until you round on third year on all the services, and you just discover like you like or don't like some fields. Medicine obviously clicked for both of us. I have some guests, I can just tell we're that kind of people. But there are things I liked a lot more than I thought I would like. I like peds more than I thought I would like it. I didn't like OB-GYN. I guess I also predicted I wasn't going to like OB-GYN. I liked surgery a lot more than I thought I would like it. That did surprise me. I didn't think I would like it so much. And depending on how life had gone, I could have imagined that I had done it. So yeah, I think it's a good proposal. Okay. The other thing I wanted to say was the first proposal of PhD in postdoc years of fellowship. UCLA has a STAR program, so it's actually very similar to that. Yeah,
I think they should exist. I think there are people, and I mean the lab adjacent to the one I'm doing my postdoc work in is run by a recent straight MD who did extensive postdoctoral research, and he's a superstar, and that's great. And that's a mechanism for those superstars to in a few short years, like get a research program up and running and run with it. And that's great. There are some thoughts of like moving the PhD earlier in the medical training. And that to me just seems like people will be out of the lab for longer. That doesn't benefit anybody. You're less clinically informed. That doesn't benefit anybody.
Let me ask you a question about the PhD side. That I've always struggled with this one. You spend a lot of time physically doing things during your PhD, from cell culture, pipetting to.
We move small volumes of liquid from tube to tube, and then go home, and then remember to put them in the right fridge or freezer, and then go home. That's like a lot of what we do.
That's a lot of what you do.
Yeah,
that's my impression as well. Okay, and then ultimately, when you're the PI of the lab, especially the real, we were talking about the PIs, the real players in the game.
Yeah.
They haven't, the only liquid they go near is coffee. They're not around any liquid. Okay. So my question is, obviously to some degree, it helps to do the menial tasks to understand the big picture. To some degree, you can overdo it. I mean, same with being a doctor. You could have doctors do all the phlebotomy on the floor, but they're going to miss out on some other parts of medical training, right? So my question to you is that a place that we're striking the wrong balance? Like, could a PhD
graduate scientific training at large? You mean?
Yes.
Yeah. I think every graduate student would say yes, and then we would defend our own experiences by saying there's so much technical nuance that like you can't advise people on those details if you don't and supervise those people if you haven't had to do the struggle yourself. Like, no attending is saying that they need to be able to supervise the like subclavian IV that gets like the hone that gets placed in their BMT patient. And thus it like the experience of doing it is worthwhile. And thus the fact is that they don't need to learn to place hones. Whereas in science, I mean, if we're still going to continue this sort of apprenticeship graduate student type model where the graduate student can go to the PI and say, yes, I'm doing this PCR, it's not working, can you help me troubleshoot it?
Yes.
The PI is going to be like, what's a PCR? Like they don't know how to troubleshoot it at all. I mean, like my dad tells the story of, he's a PI at the NIH, of a trainee who didn't have any medical scientific background in the past. This was in like the late 80s, early 90s, who was putting each of the drop of liquids needed for a PCR reaction on a different spot on the side of the PCR tube and not like putting them all at the bottom. And they were troubleshooting this PCR for weeks. And it's just like, the person didn't realize that the machine and the tube didn't get the liquids to mix. And he wouldn't have thought like, why didn't you put them all together? And so unless you literally know like, oh, well, those are polypropylene tubes and those don't work for this assay. Oh, those are like coated plates. You have to use uncoated plates to get this type of cell to grow happily. Like there's so many technical things that it's hard to imagine dropping a lot of what we ask grad students to do.
I see. Okay. Fair enough.
But you know what we don't learn to do?
What?
Is be a PI.
Yes, you don't learn to be a PI.
So flip it around.
Write grants.
The downside to gaining this technical knowledge is that it's very patchy as to whether someone who graduates PhD could successfully be a PI without a postdoc.
Right.
Now, that was more common decades ago for a variety of scientific and financial reasons. But, you know, a lot of people, I know a number of people who are now junior faculty say, I did not really learn how to write grants, review manuscripts, and mentor. And so I think what the point you're making is not is a lot of a grad student's time is spent doing menial small labor in lab.
Yeah.
And it's that can be valuable, but it can also happen at the expense of bigger picture skills that need to be learned.
Let me ask you this. So I guess I think you're putting it very nicely, and now you make me think of something I think about a lot. And but I don't know about it from your perspective, a lab person. From my perspective as a policy person, I think I can teach people a lot of things. I can teach people how to how to build a data spreadsheet and why some things look better than others. And I think to some degree that's like It's so funny. For a while, I had such a tangent, but for job interviews for certain research positions when I was in Oregon, I don't like to do the interview because I believe it has poor predictive value. So I like to give people a task and let them take it home and do it. And I judge them based on the task. And I blind myself and a third party. You would imagine I do something like this. So the task was building this spreadsheet, and they had very little instruction for how it should look aesthetically. It will blow you away that when you give some task like this to people, that me and a second person coding independently, we agree with astonishing accuracy whose presentation of the data is the best. It's amazing. So I mean, I can teach that. I can teach different statistical methods when you think about it, and how to write the paper and please the reviewers and get it. Okay. But the thing, I think the most important thing somebody who works with me should learn, that I'm not sure I can teach, I don't know how to do it, but I think it is the most important thing, is how do you decide in the universe of questions, what questions to spend your time on? And in policy, because if it's, it has to be topical, but if it's too topical, you'll be scooped. It has to be something that people are interested in. But again, if too many people are interested in, you're going to be scooped. You have to know, as you think about questions all the time, what data is available to you that you can answer the questions with. And so sometimes people come to me and they're like, oh, we should look at blah, blah, blah. And I say, yeah, we should. But there's no way to get that data. You're going to have, so you can't look at it. But you could ask this question where you can get the data, and it gets at it. So my question to you as a lab person is, how much of being a PI is that process, the cognitive process of deciding what questions to tackle, when to tackle them, and why? Not necessarily the nuts and bolts of writing, and how, but is that analogous in your line of work?
No, it's a perfect analogy, because one thing that even I have trouble with, I mean, I was in the PhD lab for 4 years and change, and then I did med school and residency and a first year fellowship. So I was out of lab for 5 years, longer than I was in the lab. Now I'm coming back this past year, to start my postdoc, having not pipette for 5 years. Science is getting technically more complicated every year. I mean, it's like hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce a Nature paper. I mean, with 20 authors. I mean, it's a different beast than it was decades ago. And I know that every year this argument can be made, because it's like gradually getting worse and worse and worse. But the technical details of what is good and interesting science, that is growing exponentially. And that often takes up brain power that could be better spent on reading and thinking and asking better questions. Right. And instead, not outsourcing things so much, but having more things that are cores, so to speak. Like right now, for instance, I mean, I have a bias that I'm at a large academic center with a federally funded genome center, but like if somebody on campus wants to like take their mouse tumor and do the whole exome sequencing of it, like you make DNA, you pay somebody like at a core a few $100 to do it, and they give you your reads back, and then you do the analysis. You're not by individual sample making a whole exome library over and over and over again. So there are things that are very efficiently outsourced like that, but there is a disconnect between how training happens, how the institution is structured, and whether those things whether that vision is done coherently. And I think to your point though, like there's not a great schema of learning to ask questions and learning to probe. And so COVID has, I think, been really hard for grad students more than a lot of other people in science, because PIs can work from home. People are trying to spread their work out. I mean, the grad students I know are like looking for senior people to ask things of.
Right.
I mean, I think, beggars, like, it can't complain about, being a grad student. There are people that have it infinitely worse. So I don't want any tears here, but it's made me realize how not having those pop around the corner casual questions. Can you look at this real quick? I'm in the middle of this thing. What should I do right here? Or, hey, I was just reading this paper. Can I shoot the shit with you for a second and ask this big picture question? That can't happen right now with all the distance.
That's a good point. I mean, I think it's, I don't know where to start. I mean, I think that's a good point to put your finger on for where it's been super disruptive. And it's we can I mean, you make the good point. A lot of people suffering, but the point I want to make is that these people who are doing this work, they're under a lot of stress. They were under stress when things are working like a well-oiled machine, and when things are difficult, when you're talking about a pipeline that's as leaky as it is, I think there's going to be a lot of stress. And so I'm sympathetic. Yeah.
No, I think in like 8 to 10 years time, I mean, I don't know if people will think about it this way because there are much bigger problems to worry about, but I would wonder if we did the same sort of think about, and we did an analysis of how MSTP and graduate student outcomes looked in the context of COVID, what was the impact? Because, I have a lot of friends from college. Actually, I have fewer scientific friends and medical friends than non. And so my lawyer friends from college wonder why we picked this career, and they wonder, why is it so stressful? You're just moving liquid around in tubes all day. And the thing I tell them is, science is like the worst example of where you can put in hours of effort and then the laser on one machine burns out while you're analyzing your sample and your month of work is thrown away. There aren't that many other things. I mean, writing a book, someone writes
you
a better
print a copy. Yeah.
Like I knew a graduate student in immunology whose experiments were to breed mice, then a few weeks after the mice were born, take them down and take a certain subset of cells out of that mouse and put them into another mouse. And then you wait a few months, and then you take down those mice and then put their cells into a dish. And then you grow them for a few weeks, and then you take them out and put them back into a third mouse. And it's a very appropriate question that they're asking. But if the person in lab accidentally spills the bucket that has the little gold pieces of metal that you need to run the assay, all of that effort is thrown away.
Yeah.
All of it's thrown away. And the people that we select for MSTP cannot handle that.
Yeah.
I mean, we are used to being such high achievers that that sort of utter failure of just like literally taking a week's work and just like pushing it into the trash can drives us insane. And I think that is one of the things that actually would drive people away from science out the other end, where, and I mean this as
no, I mean
professionally. I mean that next statement as professionally as possible, that sometimes in medicine things don't go right for your patient, even though you made the right decision and you would make the same decision again. And so your patient's
comfortable with that,
good or bad outcome doesn't mean that your blood, sweat, and tears were worthless in medicine.
David, I mean, I have to tell you that of all the things about the laboratory that repelled me, that is exactly it, which is that massive amounts of labor and absolute uncertainty, high rates of failure, things don't even go to completion. And for somebody who is more geared towards faster feedback for myself, I found it untenable. But let me add, I mean, what you're saying makes me think of a broader philosophical question that, some people have picked with me, which is that in a way, the way we're choosing doctors writ large, all doctors, and high rates of burnout and high rates of depression, high rates of, wanting to go part-time and all these things that we're facing, we're picking them differently than when we picked them 50 years ago. Because 50 years ago, we picked people who the CV arms race wasn't the same, and the people you picked, they might have been in the summer before med school, they might have flipped burgers at a burger joint.
I worked at the NIH doing cryo electron microscopy.
Exactly. Yeah,
No, it
you're the
was.
opposite. I worked at a Kroger, pushing the shopping carts, which is still the hardest, still the job of I've ever had that taught me that I'm lucky to have this job. But I mean, the point is real, which is like, high achievers and high achievers with a lot on your CV. So that kind of thing has been built into your life. And then it's hard, I think, to be a high achiever and then to take care of people and see many of them die despite your best efforts. And I think it's very hard for people to separate. I think that like like all doctors, when things don't go the way I want it to go, I agonize about it, and like wakes me up from sleep. And I talk to a lot of people, and I look through charts, and I do a lot of stuff.
But you won't necessarily also have to move your family to another city for a different job than you were planning a few months ago. It's different.
Oh,
That's the thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah, like in the medical context.
As opposed to which?
Opposed to science. I mean, if you don't publish your paper by a deadline, you could lose your visa. I mean, that's the international grad students, international postdocs. I mean, that's what they're facing. I mean, you have X number of years to not just do good science and ask good questions, but it's publish papers. I mean, I think PIs don't realize that trainees go around asking, how's your blood paper? How's your Nature cell biology paper? We refer to the commodity by its target journal, not how's your project on gene X or mouse model Y. And so with that deliverable mindset, science really messes with your head, and you're saying, well, if I don't get this out in a deadline, then I mean, I won't be able to apply for the next job. I won't be able to, I might get fired. I might lose my visa. I mean, those are just different. This is a different calculus than people that go into certain other professions where there's laterality. Like, you're a junior at one law firm, you can move to another law firm, even within the same city. Like that is highly likely to be possible for you.
Yeah, that's true. I guess, okay, so here's my solution, and I want to know your solution for all the things we've been talking about. My solution is the only solution is randomization. So I would do it at like several levels. I would randomize junior faculty right now, there's a few things. You can spend hellish amounts of time writing these things, and I've spent it, 70 page, 80 page, 100 page plus proposals to do work that I could probably convey to you better instead of reading that 100 pages by talking to you for 7 minutes. I probably could do a better job. I saw somebody recently, there was like an article I was looking at, and it said that we should have videos where the person just explains what they want to do on video to make everyone's life easier. Okay, so and of course, of this huge selection, this pool, a few people get a lot of money. Or we could have like lotteries or modified lotteries, like above a certain threshold, we'll randomly give it out. That's for how to fund researchers. And then I think for your proposal, a couple programs could bandy together and actually, if, with the consent of the people, test it. Literally randomly assign them to go do PhD between second and third year or third and fourth year, and then follow them, 10 years into their career to see differences in K awards and R awards and lab work. I think that's answerable. But I wonder what you think. It's also logistically.
I think, defining what the problem is almost always the hardest and first step, right? And I think as much as individuals who I have as close friends who have gone into private practice after MSTP or have gone into a subject not conducive to academic basic science research, and I love and respect those people. As far as the program goes, it's a very select few people that probably get together and really have the hard conversation of, are we achieving our goal of, and fill in the blank what the goal is. Because I don't know, I think if you ask most MSTPs, 1 in 4 ending up in private practice rate is not what the point was. Just honestly, it's not. And so, whether you could really randomize to get power to analyze the difference in outcomes is hard, but it may be the best way forward. What I wish honestly would happen first is just people try a few different things and just like do it for a few years.
Uncontrolled phase 2, right?
Exactly. Pilot programs. I mean, because part of it is I think people are afraid of unintended consequences. Like you move the PhD a year earlier, does nobody ever do science again.
Yes.
Or, one of the dilemmas that happens right now is, when you finish your PhD, it's not always in June on cycle to go back to the clinics. So what if you did your PhD between third and fourth year? Well, then how do you finish your PhD going into the residency application cycle? There are a lot of like secondary and tertiary effects that would have to be thought out. I'm not opposed to programs randomizing, WashU has 20 to 25 MSTPs a year, so does Penn. Maybe
too many.
Maybe offer a few slots for people to do things differently and see how those people pan out. I don't know.
It's interesting. And I guess one thing that we didn't state that we should state at the outset is, we don't have an MD-JD program like this. I mean, this is something that we all believe is different. That's why it's being funded different. That's why it's being curated different. But one can imagine a lot of other combos. Yeah, I found this conversation really interesting. Obviously, I'm mostly on your wavelength through all the data that you put out. I've looked at that data, I think, a while back, and I think I reached a similar conclusion. And I think you're right. I mean, the question is, what do we want to see? And I think what you want to see is you want to get people to go into the program when they have committed in their heart that that's what they want to do. And having thus committed, you want them to stick with it at high rates, at least to show return on investment from the societal payment. Yeah.
So a few points we haven't mentioned is
Okay.
one, what is the impact of how residencies and fellowships are structured on whether somebody who intended to go into lab actually ends up going into lab?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's so variable that it's hard to, different subspecialties make it a lot harder. And it's not the MSTP's fault per se. It might be that specialty makes it very hard to be trained in a way to start an R01 funded lab. So there's this PSTP parallel to MSTP, which is not a NIGMS funded situation in the same way MSTP is, but in essence, folks like myself can do 2 years of medicine residency and 4 years of HemeOnc fellowship. And I'm only going to actually be single boarded in onc, where that first year of fellowship is 100% clinical. And then for 3 years, I do a single day of clinical week, and then I'm in the lab the rest of the time. So that's my postdoc right there. Maybe
Yes.
I take another year as an instructor.
Yes.
That has a high success rate.
Yes.
I mean, with very small sample size of getting people into that position. I mean, we do that in rheumatology here, cardiology, all the medicine subspecialties here, and at a number of the other sort of top 20-ish programs around.
Right.
Different residencies do or don't offer that. I mean, pathology is probably the extreme, even beyond medicine, where there are places where you'll come into path residency, do really just a single year of clinical work, and then dabble in clinical work in the next 3 or 4 years, and essentially do a residency postdoc with the anticipation that you actually don't do clinical service. Probably you're just a board eligible pathologist with a really high powered lab. And that's a little bit of a West Coast slant and maybe a Harvard slant to those types of routes. But most of the procedural subspecialties don't provide a truly high likelihood route to be a lab PI, admittedly. So how you distribute the blame for our private practice percentages, et cetera, is an open-ended question as well.
Yeah, I guess I'll say my one pet peeve about PTSP. My one pet peeve is I don't want to name names, but when if a trainee comes to clinic and they only want to learn about one disease, which is what they want to run the lab in, I get irritated because I want people to learn all the diseases, but obviously, maybe that doesn't make sense. That's just my pet peeve. All right, David, our time is up. David Russler Germain, this is a great discussion.
Can I add one last point?
Okay, go for it.
So it's application season. And so people are currently getting their acceptances to med school and MD PhD. And I think I'd kick myself after this if I didn't say that for everyone who listened, who is thinking about going to an MD PhD program, make the decision of whether it's right or wrong for you, largely irrespective of what we've discussed today.
I think
not a recommendation to or to not do it. You should know these factors. And I think by and large, most MSTP students don't regret doing it. But I also think applicants should have a more realistic understanding of what their future career would probably look like. it is not 90% of people are 80/20 and have RO1s. You
Right.
have to understand that you're doing this potentially with the likelihood of saying, oh, I want to be a private practice OB-GYN, and that's fine. Like that is not uncommon, and you should do the MD PhD whether or not you think that is what you're going to end up doing.
That's good advice. I think they should also reach out to you for questions. You're around. They'll track you down.
Yeah. Ask people questions. Ask some residents and fellows about their experiences and how it shaped them.
David Russler Germain, it's been a real pleasure. We'll talk again soon on a different topic.
Oh yeah, it was awesome, Vinay. Good to see you.
Good to see you.